They're very, they're, they're very chatty today.
All right, thank you. Good evening. This is a regular meeting of Livingston's Planning Board, and notice of this meeting has been published in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act.
Thank you. Can you take the roll, please?
Will do. Mr. Ratner?
Yes.
Mr. Diner?
Say yes.
Yes.
Mr. Dufford?
Yes.
Mr. Batani?
Yes.
Ms. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Santola?
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez?
Yes.
We have our quorum. We have our board attorney. Mr. Reber, Ms. Foss, Mr. Lewis, Ms. Wishnu are not present this evening.
Thank you. If you can please call the first matter.
The matter before the board is a hearing on investigation of whether Block 6100, Lot 11, for 2 Peachtree Hill Road constitutes an area in need of redevelopment as a non-condemnation redevelopment area pursuant to the New Jersey Redevelopment here and Housing Law Statute. Mr. Chairman, today we have Topology here to do a presentation on that hearing.
Thank you. So just before we start, just want to go through what we're doing today. This is the portion of tonight's meeting that is dedicated to a forum in which an explanation of a draft report of whether a specific study area is in need of redevelopment without condemnation will be presented. The scope of the study and preliminary recommendations will be explained, and then members of the public will have the opportunity to ask questions or offer comments. The Township Council, by Resolution R 24-244, authorized the Planning Board to conduct the study and engage Topology to provide the necessary professional services. We are recording this. We don't have a stenographer, but we are recording this. Speakers, while they can make statements, will not be required to speak under oath. The study area consists of tax block 6100, lot 11. The street address is 2 Peachtree Hill Road. There is a state statute that sets forth both specific criteria for determining whether property is in need of redevelopment and the procedural steps that must be followed. The Planning Board determined that a draft report prepared by Topology was ready for public hearing, and the board set this evening as the time of the hearing. Notice of the hearing required by state law have been provided, and as stated in the notices, a report has been available for public inspection as required by state law. It is important to understand that this is not a hearing to decide that the study area property is required to be redeveloped. The most that can happen as a result of the hearing would be for the Planning Board to accept the planner's report as the board's recommendation to the Town Council. If that recommendation is made, the Town Council will then decide at its own public hearing whether or not to direct that a redevelopment plan be professionally prepared. If that happens, it would only be for a voluntary, non-condemnation redevelopment only. So we have representatives of Topology here tonight, and I will ask them to present their report and go through any points that they'd like to go through. So
thank you, Chairman. Good evening, board members. For the record, it's Phil Abramson from Topology. I'm joined here by Mark Linser. I think for our show this evening, Mark's going to kind of open us up and give some of the background in our slide deck, and then I'm going to finish it up on the statutory criteria.
Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead, Mark?
Okay, great. Get open both my laptops. Love the high tech here. And there we go. Great. Okay, before I get underway, just good evening, everyone. I know that I've not met everyone on the board yet, so I appreciate the pleasure of being able to present to you this evening. As mentioned, this is for 2 Peachtree Hill Road at block 6100, lot 11. We'll go quick through the process and the overview given the wonderful introduction from the chairman, such as the prior resolution authorization from the Township Council for the Planning Board to conduct the study, which was then authorized for Topology to conduct on the board's behalf, the report of which is the basis for this hearing right now. Some of the manners in which we conducted the investigation and the evidence that we incorporated into this process include a site inspection of both exterior and interior conditions on December 26th of last year, as well as collection and review of municipal records regarding the property, including tax, building, construction permits, code enforcement, police and fire, land development, historic maps, photography and aerial imagery, as well as documents associated with the study area, including lease agreements, easements, and things of that nature, as well as the existing zoning parameters for the site. So to give an overview of the site, you see it in this inset as part of this map, highlighted in the red. It's generally rectilinear site with an office complex in the middle, consisting of 3 wings, so to speak, and surrounded by surface parking. It is 30.696 acres. For context, that's just over half the size of the Livingston Mall site across the street. It is just one parcel, as previously mentioned, being block 1600, lot 11. It is designated as a 4A tax code, meaning it's commercial property, with the valuation just shy of $30 million. It is located within the RL Research Laboratory Zone. There is an RL2 zone in the northwest portion of the township. Otherwise, this zone is unique to those that you see on the map right now in the southwest portion of the township. And regarding development on the site, it was originally developed in the late 70s as viewed through aerial imagery, completed by the end of that decade. And this image shows its state in 1995 from Google Earth imagery. Regarding the statutory criteria that are relevant to tonight, as mentioned, there is the local redevelopment and housing law that specifies which of any 8 criteria the board may find for the site to be deemed an area in need of redevelopment. And these cannot just simply be recitations of those criteria as it relates to the site in question, but we must provide substantial evidence backed up by some of those materials that I mentioned previously, such as building inspections, prior municipal documentation, block-by-block analysis, or in this case, a parcel-by-parcel analysis to substantiate the claims of criteria being eligible for designation. As part of tonight's overview of our study, we're focusing on 2 sets of these criteria, criteria A and criteria B. Firstly, here you see this criteria A annotated. I will read through the entirety of it and then explain why it's annotated in this way. So criteria A being the generality of buildings are substandard, unsafe, unsanitary, dilapidated, or obsolescent, or possess any of such characteristics, or are so lacking in light, air, or space as to be conducive to unwholesome living or working conditions. And my apologies for the unaligned brackets here. But the point of this is to indicate that we're looking at 2 sets of this clause that must be linked. We're looking at the generality of the buildings and their conditions, whether they're substandard, unsafe, unsanitary, et cetera. And those conditions that are observed must be conducive to unwholesome living or working conditions. Regarding criteria B, which we'll also use tonight, there are several clauses within this, and I'll read through the whole criteria and then focus on the one pertinent to this investigation. So criteria B being the discontinuance of the use of a building or buildings previously used for commercial, retail, shopping malls or plazas, office parks, manufacturing or industrial purposes, the abandonment of such buildings or buildings, significant vacancies of such buildings or buildings for at least 2 consecutive years, or the same being allowed to fall into so great a state of disrepair as to be untenable. And for this investigation, we are focusing on specifically that first clause, that the use previously occupying the site has been discontinued. I believe the board is more familiar with the vacancy portion of this clause, which is known as the 2-year clause, which is not relevant to the scope of the investigation as we have conducted it. Okay. Now I'll hand it over to Phil.
Thank you, Mark. So again, we're looking at one parcel here. It's lot 11 in block 6100, and we're going to kind of go through why criteria A and criteria B are applicable. As Mark said earlier, he read through this. I'm not going to read through it again. Under criteria A, generality of buildings are unsafe, dilapidated, and we're going to kind of show you some pictures of the inside of this building to show the level of dilapidation and lack of safety. So basically, when this This building was most recently like they call them server farms or data storage facility. When that facility was vacated, the premises, they took a lot of things with them, and the good upkeep of the building along with it as well. So you could see here how the prior tenants basically ripped out wiring, ductwork, the emergency egress signs. So it was not really done in a very surgical way, but maybe just more of a hatchet than a scalpel. Additional examples, just kind of that there's equipment just everywhere. So, obstacles, tripping hazards, generally unsafe conditions as the general sense of the word unsafe. Some additional examples of dilapidation, missing masonry, probably certain areas of water damage, water leakage. There was you could see here that because of the specific use of the property, there was like a super floor over the primary masonry floor of the building. These pipes here were all used for cooling liquid to cool down the servers. And so basically that whole floor was removed. The pipes are still in there. So this kind of creates, and you could see here how this door is like kind of a floating doorway in the corner where there was that super floor sitting above the main floor of the building where wires and pipes were going. So this was very much a purpose-built building, basically all torn out, leaving behind only maybe the things that were really difficult to remove. Limited safety measures now in here. There's missing floor tiles, there's tripping hazards, and like a door that you could walk into and kind of fall down 18 inches. But some additional things that we observed, there were the fire doors that were propped open by the janitor's mopping sign. The sprinkler room alarm was going off basically the entire time during the site visit, and had to be manually shut off to stop making noise. The site security, the Livingston Police Department has had kind of constant issues with this property. There were burglar incidents as of last year, recovering stolen merchandise. So the site is unsecure. There's a fenced perimeter, but it's, there kind of on the outskirts of town. There have been, and you could even see here, Livingston Police Department, just constant fire alarm, fire alarm, fire alarm. So this has become an issue for the community and a weight on your public servants. So generally speaking, the generality of the buildings are at this point substandard and unsafe, dilapidated. I think that you could qualify this building under criteria A. This is kind of pointing to some of the unsanitary images that were here as well. Okay, so going to criteria B. So as Mark stated, we're going to focus on the discontinuance of the use of a building that was previously used for either commercial or industrial purpose, however you want to characterize this. And that's kind of what the statute requires. If you read the syntax of this, the discontinuance of use is sort of enough. The abandonment is another part after a semicolon. The significant vacancies for 2 years is another semicolon, or the same being allowed to fall in such a state of great disrepair to be untenable is another semicolon. So we're going with the stuff before the first semicolon, discontinuance of use of buildings previously used for this list of sort of non-residential purposes. Discontinuance in this case is evidenced by the lease that we were able to obtain that was terminated in March of last year, and then also just the physical removal of all the equipment that was really unique to this use. This is just a clip from the lease itself that the lease ended on March 31st. There were construction permits pulled in July to basically remove all the data center equipment. Only the building base electrical was to remain. So all the things that kind of made this unique purpose-built building what it was were basically taken out over the course of the summer. There were emergency generator fuel tanks, 5 of them in total. In 2020 and in 2024, they were all removed from this site. And again, this is something that was a physical requirement for a server-type use like this. All the cabinets were removed. The superfloor was removed.
Were the tanks above ground or below ground?
Do you know?
They were below ground.
Below ground tanks. All the utility rooms have essentially been cleared out. So, you know, discontinuance, for me as a planner, and in terms of the type of standard that I want to make sure that we're meeting and that we're kind of finding here, this is not a vacant office building. This is a little bit more than a momentary pause in use. This is a true discontinuation of use. There's overt actions showing an intent to discontinue this use. It's not really readily adaptable. Somebody couldn't come in with a coat of paint or even like fix the drop ceiling. There's a lot that would have to be done to this building, AKA like redevelopment, to adapt this for another type of use or a similar permitted use in the zoning district. It was purpose-built. There's these expansive utility wings. There's a central operational control room. There's redundant electrical lines throughout the building. So again, this has really been, major investment was made to make this into a data center server facility, and all of those things for the most part have been removed. You know, thinking about this, again, being used for another type of use, there's very large floor plates in here. There's very few windows. It would not be necessarily suitable for somebody to come in and just open up shop as an office in here. It's not really adequately parked for office use. And then so the other types of uses that we might look at, being able to just sort of be able to move in, would be something like an industrial or warehouse operation. There's only one loading bay. It's not really conducive to a logistics type operation either. So this was really a purpose-built building for a very specific use. All the equipment and all the improvements associated with that use have now been taken out. So this is, again, a true discontinuation of use, not a temporary vacancy. So in my opinion, it qualifies not under just criteria A, but also criteria B. There's been an overt decommissioning of this facility. The use that it was intended for may no longer be conducted on this property. It's not a building that really could be adaptively reused. That's not one of the required findings, but I do think that it kind of it underscores some of our findings, that we're not dealing with a temporary situation. The structure is not simply vacant. So these are our conclusions, as I've said. This is where we are right now. The report was provided to you. We're here to kind of have a conversation about it, answer any questions you might have. Ultimately, you'll provide a report back to the governing body. They will accept, reject, or modify your recommendations. So happy to answer any questions. Me or Mark.
Any questions from the board?
Just to clarify for the board, either of those alone is grounds for finding a
Absolutely.
redevelopment, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Bill, do you know, was it built as a data center in the 70s, or would it have a...
I was asking the same. I don't know that we were able to answer that question.
We didn't have definitive information on that. From aerial imagery, the last modifications to it substantively from at least from the outside were in the 90s, and they were very minor. But the actual envelope of the building has not changed since original construction. But yeah, ultimately, we were able to confirm if it was originally built in that form in that.
And it was always one story.
Yeah.
It's not one story. There are multiple stories inside.
Oh, there are.
I believe 3. But yeah, they're split between, like the server room is double height, for example. And there's some areas that are office wings, some are large utility wings. But yeah, it's generally a 3-story building.
Mr. Dufford, our planning board historian, has said that, yes, it was originally built as a data center.
Interesting.
He was the only one around in the 40s when it was built.
No respect.
And it was AIG was the most recent. Was it always their facility? Interesting.
Is there any recommendations or thoughts of what the use of the property would be, assuming that this is approved and moves forward?
Yeah, I think that will ultimately, that's going to be a conversation, a discussion with the governing body. Right now, I really try to avoid those types of, because like we need to make a very narrow focused decision on the evidence in front of us. A redevelopment plan really can't be adopted or can't even be contemplated until this decision is made about the condition. Like, so this is sort of the ticket of entry in terms of this process. It's the foundation of this process.
In your professional opinion as a planner, do you see this more in industrial, in that type of use, as opposed to residential?
So this has nothing to do with the question at hand.
He knows this.
He knows this. I think it could honestly, this is a location, we're at Columbia Turnpike, South Orange Avenue, Eisenhower Parkway. There are industrial uses around it, there's institutional uses around it, there's residential uses around it. I don't think that any one of those, interestingly, and there's not a lot of sites that you could say this about, where it can go either way, honestly. I think that they would need to be, clearly, it's worked as an quasi-industrial, commercial type use. I think if it was built as a residential use, you'd want it to incorporate certain design features to kind of buffer it from Columbia Turnpike, South Orange Avenue. But, this is a unique area of the township, honestly. It's on the very edge. It's probably one of the last parcels. And then everything behind it is like swamp and wetlands. So it is very isolated. And again, right behind Kushner, they just built townhomes. So there's some precedent. There's a medical office right across. This is like a cornucopia of land uses, in a way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
AIG was there till March 31st of last year? Were
That's
they
right.
physically there, or?
That's our understanding.
And I believe that they remained on the site of several months after the lease as part of those construction permits to vacate their equipment. But
So they were there till the termination date of their lease, and maybe beyond that as well?
Yes.
So, okay, so it hasn't been abandoned for that long?
correct.
Any other members of the board, any questions? Members of the public, do you have any questions for the witness and the report? Hearing none, they're seeing none. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, board members.
Okay, having heard the presentation, having read the report, and having heard from questions of the board, are there board member? What are the feelings of the board, or whether the report should be accepted as written? Any modifications, any changes, any revisions? Seeing none, if I can then have a motion to, well, I guess what we'll need to do is, under what criteria, make a motion that the property meets the requirements of an area redevelopment, in which portion of the statutory code it meets. So, look, I think that, after hearing from topology, that, I think it clearly meets both the A and B conditions. The property has been, has been abandoned. You actually touched upon a couple points that I was going to ask some questions about, whether, the conversion of it, but with the lack of windows, the underparking, it's not as though, as you mentioned, you can go in there and slap a coat of paint on it and use it as an office building or something else. So I'll make that motion that qualifies as an area in need of redevelopment without condemnation under both statutory sections A and B.
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion?
I agree.
Hearing none. Jackie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you made that motion, and the second by Mrs. Santola. Mr. Fernandez?
Yes.
Mrs. Santola?
Yes.
Mr. Ratner?
Yes.
Mr. Diner?
Yes.
Mr. Dufford?
Yes.
Mr. Badani?
Yes.
Ms. Khanna?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the, for the great presentation. Certainly covered everything that we needed to consider. We appreciate it. Thank you, members of the public, for coming out. And Mr. Diner, it's your turn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Do you suspect I'm a lawyer?